Good Wednesday morning, Mr. Colin Coleman. How are you?
Very good. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you very much. Big credentials there. My cup of tea, ex-CEO at Goldman Sachs, and pretty much the person who brought the business into the country pretty much and made it something substantial. A banker. I always try and dress like a banker, actually. A banker, an academic, and a public figure. Wow, it's a lot of weight to carry on your shoulders.
It's just my life. I've had an exciting life, and I'm happy to share a little bit of it with you.
Thank you so much. And I am Kaimowitz, and as we go along, I'll try to share some snippets about a business I'm involved in called Virtual Actuary, and I'm the admin guy in the business, and I do a couple of other things as well. Okay, so the topic for today is lessons from Africa, starting businesses to seize opportunities from market failures. Okay, so question number one, and some insight from your side. When we say starting businesses, what do we mean? As someone who has led a big corporate, what steps are you thinking about when looking to start a business? So there's two angles. One is, if you were going to start a business, what would you be thinking? And number two is, as a business leader who's run a corporate, when you look at a startup, if you feel that the startup is doing well, what does that mean?
Okay, well, I mean, starting a business, whether it's within a big business like a Goldman Sachs, or a small business that you have as a thought in your head that you want to now mobilize capital and management and personnel and resources behind, the same things apply. You need to have a clear vision of why you want to start that business, what's the opportunity, and you need to have a business plan that has a vision of what resources you're going to put to bear against what return, and what are the risks in the business that you're about to start, and what are the rewards, the scale of rewards. And the rewards are never, I would guess, one-dimensional. They can be a spectrum of outcomes, and you have to have a sort of sense that on a risk-reward basis, you're going to be able to get to an outcome that's going to be a profitable outcome for you and good for everyone else. So I mean, I started that business in Goldman Sachs. To be honest, I think that I completely underestimated the risks. In fact, I was probably not blind to the risk, but something approaching that, and went into it. Perhaps it's easier when you have a Goldman Sachs behind you to take lesser of a view, but if you're on your own, you need to be cognizant of all the risks and plan your business around them. So I taught a course at Yale University in 2020, which was entitled Doing Business in Africa, the Last Frontier of Global Growth. And one of the things we talked about was, how do you deal with seizing market failures, opportunities, and how do you effectively design a business such that you anticipate future challenges. Many of those challenges, by the way, are a function of your success. So when you start to print revenue, like an MTN in Nigeria, and you're printing big revenue, and now you're one of the biggest companies in Africa, you shouldn't be surprised if the tax man and the government comes looking at you and says to you, are there any loopholes so that I can effectively extract some of that revenue and profit that you now are making for myself?
Sure.
So you have to think about how do you get the local community behind you? How do you extract? How do you operate yourself and defend yourself from a regulatory point of view in a proper way? And how do you develop popular support for what you're doing so that you're not vulnerable to attack?
Fair enough. Fair enough. I think there's a lot to cover here. So just a point I want to mention is I think that being not naive, but being inexperienced in just how much effort it's going to take to succeed is actually a good thing. Because if any of us actually knew what it really took, we would never actually get the boat out the harbor, because it would be too hectic.
Don't overthink it, go for it.
I couldn't agree more.
But be alert and be smart.
Sure, of course. Okay, fair enough. We should all be so lucky to be printing money that people come and try and find loopholes. Okay, on a side note, how do you teach people to action their dreams without being inspired by people who have found shortcuts?
I think that, people who are, hoping to be the next unicorn, look at the precedents, and they should be inspired by people like Larry Page from Google, who started his business in a garage. I met him at the World Economic Forum when Google had 1 million customers, and I didn't know what Google was, and he told me it was an encyclopedia of everything. And we discussed this, and he kind of blew me away, because it was so clear. You look at Steve Jobs and the purity of his thinking about the company. All these, even Facebook, which I don't particularly like as a company, but all of these companies have grown from nothing. I mean, and in very recent history, and created products that people absolutely need, broken ground technologically. And, that sounds okay. So these are global success stories, but there's a lot of them in Africa. The whole fintech world in Africa now, M-Pesa is probably the most famous example. It's now 1/3 of Safaricom's revenues, and Safaricom is the biggest company in Africa. And yet the Safaricom multiple is way below the fintech multiple. So in reality, M-Pesa within Safaricom is a massive business, and it's basically started as a payment system. But there are many other companies like Flutterwave and many others that are similar, that are now either straight payment system companies or other forms of technology companies. And then you have groups like MTN and Vodacom and so on that have big fintech businesses within them that inevitably will be spun out, and become their own independent businesses.
Okay.
So I think the inspiration should derive from the purity of the objective and the purity of what niche are you filling, what problem are you solving, what is the market not responding to. That's why we called it market failure. What is the market failing to provide that you are able to provide in a cost-effective, user-friendly way to people that need it? Okay,
fair enough. It's to build businesses like that takes a tremendous amount of effort. They've also got backing. I guess the point I'm trying to make is that there's no overnight success. Even as a massive business, it's, as you say, undervalued on a global level. And that actually just points to the fact that there's a lot of hard work to even break past that, which is not encouraging, but more so realistic. So the point really is that realistically, if we all want...
sorry to interrupt you, that can be overwhelming for people too. If you say, it takes so long.
Any effort is overwhelming, really, isn't it? All effort is overwhelming.
The truth is, in our lifetimes, 20 years is not a long time.
Fine.
But if you start today, something that doesn't exist, and you say to yourself, you know what, I'm just going to keep at it every single day for the next 20 years.
Beautiful.
Look at what you can create in 20 years.
Well, that's the whole...
I remember I was at the launch of M-Pesa in Kenya for Goldman Sachs. I went invited by Michael Joseph to the launch. And who would have said that that's going to be a multi-billion-dollar business, and that was only probably 12 years ago.
Well, that's the whole point, is that, when people try to have these like multiples and exponential and 1,000 times, growth, you're not trying to build a quality business in 5 years because then the whole vision is wrong, but rather take 20 years. So let's celebrate companies that are actually 7 years in and still alive. That's a great business, and they're on a 20-year trajectory, and that people should really look at companies like that as well, instead of, oh no, they haven't achieved 100 million in revenue in 3 years. Okay, we'll go into it. So there's no shortcuts to success. The lack of funds is not the reason people do not shoot for the stars, but rather the lack of belief. How do we break that mindset and make people believe that they can achieve the unachievable?
Well, it kind of brings me to the core question of what differentiates, in my personal experience, the times where I've been successful and the times I have not been successful, when I've made mistakes or when I've been particularly successful. And, it sounds trite, but I believe it's true for many people. And I'll come back to that. And that is that if you have a strong belief in something, some product, some business, a goal, that is not worth very much unless it's backed by conviction. But when you have conviction, and there have been times where I have that conviction and I look deeply into my soul and say, do I really have conviction? Because I know that I'm now taking on something.
And the board disagrees with a particular issue, but you've got conviction. Please carry on.
Yeah, and it can be in any field. I mean, when I decided that I was going to get behind Cyril Ramaphosa, in the midst of being CEO of Goldman Sachs Sub-Saharan Africa, that's not an easy decision. But if you're going to do it, you're going to do it properly. There's no reason to do it half. You can't go into something and say, oh well, I'm gonna give it my best shot, but really I'm not gonna get into it.
I've got a plan B if it doesn't work out. No, they say burn the ship. They say you want to take an island, get on the island, burn the ships, and then you can't leave.
So that reminds me, Adrian Gore at Discovery or Michiel Leroux at Capitec, when they started their businesses, which was basically dawn of democracy in South Africa, thereabouts. Adrian, everybody says, oh, what a great person, how successful, and they look upon him today as a great success. But you know what he did? He had a vision for his business. He took it to his incumbent employer, who was Liberty Life at the time. They rejected it. He went outside and he found funding after a long time. He resigned. He started a business, and his business is now valued 3 or 4 times that of Liberty.
Sure.
The whole of Liberty. And it was meant to be a division of Liberty. When you have conviction, look at Capitec. Capitec, I don't think people actually realize this. Capitec's market cap is more than double Nedbank's. More than double Nedbank's, and it didn't exist 25 years ago. So when you have conviction, a market failure, like the inability of the banks 25 years ago to see the mass market as a transactional opportunity, which is essentially what Capitec is. And now they're the 3rd largest bank in South Africa after First Rand and Standard Bank. And they're knocking at the door of Standard Bank in terms of market cap. It's that conviction that you need to have to build something that's worthwhile. And it can be anything. It can be a marriage, it can be a business, it can be a nation, but that's true for everything in my humble opinion.
You're right, and the stomach to carry the risk.
And to execute and carry it out.
Sure.
I mean, that's a different order of thing. But if you don't have the conviction, you don't have the idea, you never get to the execution. But then you have to execute well.
Of course. Of course. What do you think is the number one reason why startups fail? Now, I'm going to give you my opinion. so that my opinion doesn't sound better than yours, you know. So I'm just going to say it. So I think that the number one reason why startups fail is because of tax, you know, and lack of tax incentives, basically, you know. So that's my opinion. But please, because just when you think you've got money in the bank, bang, PAYE or whatever. But please carry on.
I mean, the truth is, I don't know why startups fail. The truth is, I don't know, because I've not in my career really been an entrepreneur. I'm doing some things in my post Goldman Sachs environment. I'm doing some things where I might learn some of these lessons. But what I hear is finance is always a difficulty. I hear mentorship is always a difficulty. I hear many of these things. But you know what? In the Goldman Sachs environment, we always sort of used to say about a business, if you want to IPO it, you know,
of course,
you've got to have an equity story. Like, what's the story to the market that really captures the imagination?
Yes.
And I would imagine it's the same with a startup. If your story is not crisp, clear, differentiated, easy to understand, easy to execute, you're probably going to trip up on one of these things.
Sure. Fair enough. I was having a chat with somebody else the other day, and it was about startups and so on. And I was just saying, like, one of the lessons, really, one of the main lessons is just be careful who you get advice from. You know, have they walked the startup journey? Because a lot of people are like, yeah, you know, you need to hire the right people. You know, you need to have funding. And, you know, who's got money to hire the right people when you're trying to survive? You know, so anyway, it's a long conversation to have. Okay, moving on to the next question. And this, I think, will tap into your experience. A lot of your network consists of senior management in large corporations. What would you say is the general feel around utilizing services from startups?
No, I think there's the irony is, I think that in large companies with very senior people, they're now normally at a stage of their careers where they may not be at the apex of their career, but they've kind of broken the back of whether they're successful people, and they're mostly successful people. And generally those people, I think, are sympathetic to startup environments, and are also looking for talent and looking for innovation. So I'm on the board of the Foschini Group, for example. And sitting there, I think the whole area of online shopping is a massive. Now, Foschini is one of the market leaders in South Africa on online activities, but they are paying a lot of attention and putting a lot of resources at the board and in general in the management into looking for innovation. And that's how to reach the customer, how to operate in a virtual world, how to get the logistics chains to work, the manufacturing costs, you know, all sorts of things that are there. So I think a good senior manager, as you ask, in a large company will be ear to the ground, listening to what people say. So that's an encouragement to entrepreneurs. Don't keep quiet. Don't, you know, think you haven't got things to say or offer just because you're not big. The more innovative, the more interesting you are, the more relevant you are.
So it's a good point. You know, I believe that there's a balance between them being super risk averse and not getting into trouble, and then wanting to be encouraging towards startups. I mean, with our business, Virtual Actuary, we offer actuarial services, and in fact, our clients are pretty much the who's who of the insurance and the reinsurance and the banking world in South Africa. And we've got some global clients as well. And I can't say that we've taken on work because we weren't the best person that put a proposal forward as compared to the other big consulting firms. I'd like to believe we were, and I believe that is the reason they actually chose us. but it wouldn't be fair to say that they weren't a little bit sympathetic to the fact that they wanted to support us as a startup. But hear me out. When we're proposing for work, you don't get the feeling like they're going to give you the work because you're a startup. But I think maybe in the back of their mind, they might just be slightly inclined to support us. And in fact, we've done nicely. We've been around 3.5 years, 3 years and 5 months. Okay, still self-funded. And in fact, we now are 97.5 million rand revenue, billable hours. And on the 1st or the 2nd of August, when we do our invoicing run for July, we will then hit 100 million rand revenue in 3 years and 5 months. So not bad for a startup, as far as, trying to gain clients. So, I believe it's.
So how are you going to celebrate your 100 million rand revenue point?
Honestly, I was thinking of getting a cigar and a piece of paper and like writing 100 million rand revenue and like smoking it and taking a picture. But I don't know if it would be appropriate. So how we're going to celebrate is we'll just try to make sure that the projects we have on the go are delivered correctly for the next month. That's how we'll celebrate. To be perfectly honest.
I think you should have your cigar and take a picture.
I am thinking about it. Okay, one of the last questions. Please talk to me about not only the importance of being an online persona these days, but how one can action getting out of a comfort zone and learning to engage online. And the reason I ask this question of engaging online is because, when we're looking at market failures, we're also looking at you as an executive failures. If not you personally, but if people are executives at large firms and now they're stuck at home and now that's all about their CV and their department has let go of a whole bunch of people, that's a failure on your part as an executive to engage with the world in this new way. But you've got that right. You're actually super popular online, very, very popular. And that is actually quite unique for a business executive, in my opinion, at your level, because they just don't understand that actually online presence and actually being there is like where it's going. So you've got that right. So please talk to me about the importance of actually an online persona as a business person.
Well, look, I think that it starts off philosophically on two fronts. One is, philosophically, I think business has a responsibility to society. You can't have a responsibility to society if you don't communicate with society. One of the key and core ways to communicate with society is, in these days, an online environment, although I'm quite an amateur in respect to that. That leads to the second thing. I think you have to be authentic, right? I think you really have to you have to be yourself. And if you're not yourself, you pretend to be something else, it really shows up. And then people lose interest. So you have to, my view is I consistently, particularly on LinkedIn as a social media platform, try and communicate my views on what's going on. When I think that it's necessary, I don't do it very often. I don't post just any old thing, nonsense. And it's very rare that I talk about myself personally. My father turned 95. It was something to celebrate. There's a story behind my father. I posted that online. It got 80,000 views. But it was more communicating about his life and the impact of his life. When I retired from Goldman Sachs and I announced that I was going to Yale, there were almost 2 million views. It was 1.9 million views of that post, which was really shocking. I mean, it was extraordinary. The response that I had, I completely did not anticipate that level of interest. But it does make one think then that, you have the ability to impact the world. You don't have to be a celebrity to impact the way people think. And everybody, it's a kind of democratic platform. Everybody can say anything they like, but just remember, every time you post something, it's your reputation that you're either building or breaking when you post it. So, you have to do it over a consistent period of time. I think you have a responsibility to communicate in a serious way and be authentic about what you're saying. And and I choose my platforms. I frankly have come off Facebook. I used to post on Facebook, and one of the people I most respect, who's educated me about social media, who was actually Obama's original social media advisor, told me, never post anything that's not personal on Facebook, and never post anything that's personal on LinkedIn. And that's worked kind of quite well as a sort of guidance. But I'm learning that stuff as I go. I'm an old man, relative to this young generation. So I would hardly describe myself as a social media expert.
Yeah, I believe that on Facebook there's no recourse. You can say whatever you want, and there's no punishment for people commenting. My point. Secondly, on LinkedIn, there is punishment and there is recourse because you're a business professional. So if you don't interact in a professional way, you will be shunned as somebody who is just not reliable. And so that is the reason why I think on LinkedIn, the engagements are just more reliable. Okay. And then, on the topic, I think we are going, my view is we're moving away from the corporate brand world and moving towards the you as a brand world. So it's all about influencers and as business people, what do we represent? Do we constantly represent our business, or do we constantly represent ourselves as a business person who then supports the business? So it's just an interesting look and feel of the world that we're going into, in my opinion.
I would just comment that, when I was at Goldman Sachs, I was there 20 years, in the course of which, for the first 10, I would say there was a very much an atmosphere and a culture at Goldman Sachs that unless you were Lloyd Blankfein, the global CEO of Goldman Sachs, you didn't talk to the media. And that started to change, and I was pretty active publicly, through the broad South African and international media, and Goldman Sachs did support that. They did allow me to do quite unusually for them, to be much more outspoken than was generally the business model. And I think it worked for them and it worked for me. I mean, in the end, I never embarrassed them, and obviously reputation is everything. So you have to be very careful with, if you're a big corporate, who you allow to speak when they're speaking with a corporate behind them. So I understand that. But at the same time, it did provide me with a platform that was helpful, but it was helpful two ways. One, helpful, I think, broadly to society to hear what my thinking was, but also it was helpful to me and gave me more leverage in the business because, what I thought in a way mattered more. And when you're kind of known in that sort of way, and you giving market analysis and forecasts and so on without entering into financial forecasts, because that's a world of trouble. You in a way are becoming more valuable. And as a public CEO, you need to be out there. And I think that's something that CEOs are learning now. Adrian Gore has a page on LinkedIn. Other people have pages on LinkedIn where they're out communicating. Shamil Jusub from Vodacom is another one who's very, very active, and I think it's to their credit.
I believe so. To add to that, one doesn't want to have a team of marketing experts sitting in a boardroom trying to, tell the market what the business believes in, but rather an authentic post from the CEO about, helping somebody on the side of the road will do more for the brand than any marketing campaign on TV. That's the whole point, is that if you understand that you carry the responsibility to say what the business is all about, the business can do very, very well if you carry that responsibility. But if somebody's going to be a business leader, they're going to sit back and go, my job is to manage the business, but rather not to push the business forward, then they won't do as well. That's my whole point. Okay, in my opinion. So last question. Colin, as a business person, what is life all about?
Well, you ask as a business person. Look, I think what we're witnessing in South Africa right now, which is, a very significant meltdown in the society, and in many senses, South Africa entering its period of reckoning with a post-apartheid world. If you are in South Africa and Africa more generally, it's very true to say that your business is not just about your business. Your business is about doing business in society, and having a sustainable business means making sure that your business is seen as part of a force for good. So that sounds trite, and it sounds almost a religious statement, but it's a philosophy and a culture. We have to have some kind of social democratic impulses within the profit motive. You have to understand that a business, be it a retailing business, a financial business, a construction business, now operates within a world where in South Africa there's massive inequality. That inequality is racially bound. There's lots of different impulses as to the direction of the society. We want the direction to be a positive, non-racial, stable democracy. Then we need to act for that, and we need to be loud voices for social stability, for social welfare, for economic growth, and we need to support the Constitution. So, I think there's recent lessons, I won't elaborate, but there's recent lessons, everybody's going to understand what I'm talking about, as to why and how businesses need to operate in a very constructive way in the world in which they inhabit.
And the key word being conviction, which you mentioned earlier.
Yeah, and it starts with personal conviction, and then you got to have conviction, and your employees need to feel a conviction. And Steve Jobs, he was a difficult, challenging person when you read his autobiography, but damn, he had purity of conviction in everything he did and everything you touch. I've been very lucky to have gone to Cupertino, the new headquarters of Apple, where I met the number 2 at Apple about 3 years ago. Literally, when you feel the handrail at the headquarters of Cupertino, you feel the conviction of Steve Jobs, of the late Steve Jobs, because he designed it. He made sure that everything in that building was to his liking, to his satisfaction, just like the Apple phones that he produced. It's just an awesome sense of what comes with conviction.
Interesting North Star. We should all aim for such quality.